Welcome back to Book to Read. It's episode 9, and this time we're heading to the wild and desolate Yorkshire moors for Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights.
Ah, yes.
The Gothic romance, that's more about storms of passion and revenge than happily ever after.
Right.
I actually finished this one feeling a bit windswept myself.
It's interesting you say that because Wuthering Heights really does throw you right into the heart of the story with its unique narrative style.
Yeah.
We experience everything through the eyes of two very different narrators.
Okay.
Which makes for a captivatingly complex read.
So let's talk narrators.
Okay.
We have Lockwood, the outsider, renting Thrushcross Grange, who stumbles into this whole dramatic saga.
Right.
Then there's Nellie Dean, the housekeeper, who's been a part of the family for years and has seen it all.
Right, and neither of them are exactly unbiased observers.
Right.
Think about Lockwood. He initially misjudges Heathcliff completely and only gradually uncovers the dark history of Wuthering Heights. It makes you question everything he presents.
And then there's Nellie. It's hard to imagine she doesn't have her own opinions, and maybe even favorites, after being so closely involved with both families for so long.
Exactly. She's practically raised generations of these characters, so her narrative is likely colored by her own experiences and loyalties.
Yeah.
As you read, you're constantly trying to figure out whose version of the story am I really getting?
It makes it so much more intriguing. And speaking of intrigue, the love story between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff is anything but simple.
Yeah.
That scene where Catherine confesses she's marrying Edgar Linton, even though she loves Heathcliff.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a heartbreaker.
It's such a pivotal scene because it reveals the complexities of their relationship.
Right.
On one hand, there's this intense, undeniable love. But Catherine's choice to marry Edgar, despite her feelings for Heathcliff, exposes the stark reality of social class and its influence on their lives.
Yeah, she's torn between her heart and what society dictates is a good match. It's like her head is saying stability and status, but her heart is yearning for this wild, passionate connection with Heathcliff.
And speaking of wild, we can't forget the setting itself. The untamed, desolate moors, they're not just a backdrop, they're practically another character in the novel.
Yeah.
Brontë uses the landscape to mirror the characters' tumultuous emotions and the overall atmosphere of the story.
Oh, absolutely. The way she describes those windswept hills and stormy nights, it's almost like you can feel the raw energy of the moors pressing down on you as you read.
Yeah.
It's as if nature itself is a part of this dramatic narrative.
Precisely. And notice the stark contrast between Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange.
Right.
The rugged beauty and exposure of Wuthering Heights embody the passionate, almost primal nature of the Earnshaw family.
Yeah.
While the refined elegance of Thrushcross Grange reflects the more civilized and controlled world of the Lintons.
It's like those two houses are physical representations of the different forces at play in the story. Before we delve deeper into that, let's take a quick break to talk about a space where you can explore Wuthering Heights and so many other amazing books with fellow readers.
That's right. Have you ever wished for a platform where you could track your reading lists, share those quotes that just hit you in the feels, and connect with other bookworms?
Well, you're in luck. Bookspace is an incredible app designed specifically for book lovers.
Yeah.
It's a community where you can organize your reading life, discover new books, and share your thoughts and favorite passages with like-minded people.
Don't miss out on this fantastic opportunity to enhance your reading experience. Check out Bookspace. You won't regret it.
Now back to the stormy world of Wuthering Heights and the revenge that simmers beneath the surface.
Speaking of contrasts, you can't fully understand Heathcliff without understanding the deep resentment he carries within him.
Right.
His childhood was marked by cruelty, especially at the hands of Hindley after Mr. Earnshaw's death.
It's that mistreatment that fuels his actions as an adult.
Yeah.
He becomes consumed by a need for revenge, and it's like a fire that burns everything in its path.
And tragically, that fire spreads across generations.
Right.
The way Heathcliff mistreats Hindley's son, Hareton, is heartbreaking and forces you to question whether anyone can truly escape the shadows of the past.
Speaking of shadows, there's a definite sense of the supernatural at times, right?
Yeah.
From Lockwood's unsettling dreams to the haunting presence of Catherine's spirit, the novel has these moments that really blur the lines between the real and the spectral.
those elements add a layer of complexity and intrigue to the story.
Yeah.
They're not just there for chills and thrills.
Nope.
For instance, Lockwood's dream about the chapel and his encounter with Catherine's ghost raise important questions about guilt, the enduring power of love, and the way the past can haunt the present.
It's like the boundaries between the real world and the spirit world are blurred on those moors, making the story that much more intense.
Right. But before we get lost in the mist and mystery, we'll pause here for now and pick up our deep dive into Wuthering Heights in Part 2.
We left off talking about how the past casts a long shadow over the characters.
Right.
And it get even more fascinating when we meet the next generation.
Yeah.
It's like the sins of the fathers and mothers are visited upon the children in a very real way.
What's so captivating is how Emily Brontë creates this complex web of relationships between the younger characters.
Yeah.
You have Catherine Earnshaw's daughter, growing up sheltered and privileged at Thrushcross Grange,
Right.
completely removed from the wild world of Wuthering Heights.
And then there's Linton Heathcliff's son, who's sickly and practically a prisoner in his own home.
Right.
Their upbringings are polar opposites.
And to add another layer, there's Hareton Earnshaw, Hindley's son,
Right.
who's raised by Heathcliff at Wuthering Heights after his father's death.
It's almost cruel how Hareton is robbed of his inheritance and treated like a servant by the man who should be his guardian.
Yeah.
He's a product of the bitter cycle of revenge that Heathcliff perpetuates.
Exactly. And through these three, Cathy Linton and Hareton Brontë explores these themes of repeating or breaking cycles.
Okay.
They're each carrying the weight of their parents' actions, their love, their revenge, and the societal prejudices that they faced.
Right.
It makes you think about how much freedom we really have to make our own choices when we're so deeply connected to the past.
It's like they're all entangled in this web woven by the previous generation.
Right.
Cathy, being naive and curious, is drawn to the mystery of Wuthering Heights and the brooding Linton Heathcliff.
And you see that contrast between them so clearly in their early interactions.
Yeah.
Cathy is vibrant and full of life, while Linton is withdrawn and frail.
But as their relationship unfolds, you start to see how their differences, combined with Heathcliff's manipulative influence,
Right.
contribute to a rather tragic outcome.
And then there's Hareton, a character who I think deserves a lot of sympathy.
Oh, yeah.
He's rougher on the edges, yes.
Right.
But that's because he's been denied any opportunity for education or refinement, yet underneath that tough exterior, there's a genuine goodness to him.
You really start to see that goodness emerge through his interactions with Cathy.
Yeah.
Even though she initially dismisses him because of his lack of polish, there's a connection that forms between them.
That connection, I believe, is rooted in their shared experience of loss and their desire for something more than the limited world they've each been confined to.
Right.
In many ways, they both represent the potential for breaking free from the destructive patterns of the past.
It's as if Brontë is suggesting that even in the midst of all this darkness and pain, there's a glimmer of hope for redemption.
Precisely. But we can't talk about hope without acknowledging the haunting presence of the past that permeates everything at Wuthering Heights.
Right.
It's almost like the house itself is soaked in the memories and the pain of what's transpired there.
It brings us back to those spooky elements we touched on earlier. I'm curious, do you think Brontë intended those supernatural occurrences to be taken literally, or are they more like metaphors?
That's a question that has fascinated readers and scholars for centuries.
Yeah.
There's definitely room for interpretation. On one hand, Lockwood's encounter with Catherine's ghost seems very real within the context of his narration.
It's so vividly described. The way he talks about her trying to get in through the window, scratching at the glass.
Right.
It really sends chills down your spine.
On the other hand, you could argue that these supernatural events represent the psychological torment of the characters.
Okay.
Maybe they're manifestations of their guilt, their longing, and the way the past continues to haunt them.
So it's like the line between reality and imagination becomes blurred, reflecting the character's own internal struggles.
Exactly. And that ambiguity is part of what makes Wuthering Heights so compelling.
Right.
It leaves you pondering these questions long after you've finished the book.
And there's certainly a lot to ponder. But before we lose ourselves completely in the swirling emotions and mysteries of Wuthering Heights, let's take a moment to consider how all these pieces we've discussed fit together. Welcome back to our deep dive into Wuthering Heights.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
Yeah.
From unreliable narrators and stormy romances to social class struggles and the haunting presence of the past. Emily Brontë certainly packs a lot into this one powerful novel.
It's definitely not a light read.
No.
But that's part of what makes it so captivating.
Right.
It challenges you to confront some complex emotions and uncomfortable truths about human nature.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really struck me is how Bronte's use of language heightens the impact of the story.
I completely agree. Her writing is incredibly evocative and intense.
Yeah.
You can practically feel the wind howling across the moors and the characters' passions burning on every page.
Yes.
She doesn't shy away from depicting the raw, visceral aspects of their experiences.
It's not always pretty.
No.
The way she portrays Heathcliff's cruelty or Catherine's self-destructive tendencies, it's unflinching and makes you confront those darker sides of humanity.
It's definitely not your typical love story. Wuthering Heights forces you to examine the complexities of love and loss,
Right.
the destructive consequences of societal pressures, and the lasting impact of past wounds.
Right.
It's a story that stays with you long after you finished reading.
It does, doesn't it? It's almost like holding up a mirror to the darkest parts of the human heart. But even amidst all that darkness, I found myself clinging to those moments of connection and hope, especially between Kathy and Hareton.
Me too. Those glimmers of hope are crucial.
Yeah.
The way they find solace and understanding in each other despite the baggage they both carry suggests that maybe, just maybe, they can break free from those toxic cycles.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Can love and forgiveness truly triumph over hatred and revenge? It feels like Brontë leaves that question hanging in the air for us to contemplate.
She does, and I think that's part of the novel's brilliance.
Yeah.
It doesn't offer easy answers or neat resolutions.
Right.
Instead, it invites you to grapple with these complex questions and form your own interpretations. But beyond the big themes, I think one of the most important takeaways for you as you finish Wuthering Heights is the power of perspective.
Okay.
Remember, the entire story is filtered through the lens of those unreliable narrators.
That's so true. It forces you to constantly question everything you're being told.
Right.
Who do you believe? What really happened? And that makes you realize that there's rarely just one side to any story.
Exactly. Wuthering Heights reminds us that truth can be elusive, and it encourages us to be more critical thinkers, to question what we see and hear, to consider multiple perspectives before forming our own judgments. And that's a valuable lesson that extends far beyond the pages of this book.
Right.
It's something to keep in mind as you navigate the world around you.
It makes you think about how often we rush to judgment based on limited information or our own biases, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a reminder to be more open-minded and to seek out different perspectives.
Absolutely. And as you leave the wild, windswept world of Wuthering Heights behind, we'd like to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Given all we've discussed about the destructive cycles of the past, do you think there's any hope for redemption or change in the next generation at Wuthering Heights? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Head over to Bookspace and share your insights with our community of fellow book lovers.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Wuthering Heights. Until next time, happy reading.